Call this meeting to order. This is our only meeting for July 2nd. Typically, we do a work session on the first week. Second week, we come through with the final shebang, so we'll knock it all out tonight. I know we have a pretty full agenda, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let the record reflect that all members of the council are present, and I need an motion for the approval of the agenda, please.
So moved.
Larry Bradley, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Malcolm. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. I now need a motion for the approval of the consent agenda. This is regarding the minutes from June 4th and June 11th, Planning Commission meetings, Historic Preservation Commission minutes, Downtown Development Authority minutes, Convention and Visitors Bureau minutes.
Move to approve.
Mr. Ross Bradley, do I have a second? Second, Mr. Nathan Little. Do I hear any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Moving to public comments, I have two people signed up tonight. Ms. Gareth Finley from 1695 Brush Creek Drive, Monroe, Georgia, regarding racial injustice. Ms. Finley, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Councilmember Dickinson had asked me to bring forth my handouts that I could give to you to pass out when I came to the podium.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Well, Honorable Mayor and members of the council and those assembled, I am a newcomer to Monroe. My name is Gareth. I'm one of the folks who has moved here amid the new wave of growth and prosperity and development and good things that we are all encouraging here. I am a newcomer. I'm not around here. I have made my home permanently, but I have lived in the South 30 years. I arrived in January 2018. I bought a home and I settled here. And I've been watching and listening to this community. I make my living through real estate investing, and so getting to know the community was definitely on my agenda. And what I learned about my new home, many good things, but also something very disturbing and just impossible for me to tolerate. And I want to bring it to the attention of each one of you today, each one of you here, honorable members of the council, mayor, and those assembled. It is racial injustice. And I found, observing this community for the past year and a half, I know I'm not a lifer here, haven't been born here, grown up, but I'm old enough to observe some facts. And I observe that throughout the fabric of this community, I'm not talking about individual bigotry or hate. I'm not saying anyone here is a hateful bigot. But what I observe is systematic segregation and suppression of the African American communities and populations here in favor of the white folks. I'm talking very specifically about that. And I see this in rental housing. Looking at the real estate, I see this in owner-occupied housing. I see the segregation in rental property management. I see the segregation and the suppression in development and the education of children in this community. I see it in churches, of course. I see it, there's 2 separate American Legion halls. There's 2 separate Masonic halls. And just driving past, you can tell which is which. The poor African American facility and the better off white facility. I see it in Confederate history that's honored and enshrined in this town. My own church had a reception, Christmas party, in a historic mansion that turned out to have an exhibit celebrating the Confederacy because many leaders of the Confederacy and governors during the post-Reconstruction period made their homes here. Governors, which Monroe has a proud heritage of having these white supremacists having made their home here. 3 Confederate flags greeting visitors at each of the main entrances to Monroe that were taken down 2 weeks ago. So thank you. Monroe is showing some progress. I'm nervous. I hate speaking in public.
You're
So
doing fine.
I'm simply observing these facts of racial injustice. And just the other week, I believe it was June 15th, our community was again put up into national news. We've been in international news over the Moores Ford lynching. Germany, France, England, of course, all the national papers. 2 more minutes? Thank you, Mayor. The international press is covering Monroe, Georgia, because of our unsolved lynching only 73 years ago. No one knows who did it? International press, and now we're back in the national press over an incident of police brutality in which 2 officers have resigned amid an investigation of criminal activity in their confrontation of a citizen in a Black community. And I know I'm white, and I know that I've issued press releases and made statements about racial injustice, and some have said I'm speaking up for Black people. I don't. The statement I made in the press release, I wrote, I mean, you can't see color from type on a page, but I was the only white person authoring that statement, and most of the powerful language about Blacks in this area being brutalized was not written by me. I'm here alongside this population that's systematically oppressed. I appreciate y'all listening to me. I appreciate you very much. There are certain demands that I've presented. Mr. Probst has heard them. Chief Watts has heard them. And I trust they'll be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Finley. I appreciate your coming in. Gene Wills. Good evening, Mr. Wills. Also from Racial Injustice. What is your address, please, sir?
I live in 125 Homestead Way in Covington, Georgia.
Okay.
Okay, I came down in support of Gareth over the tasing and beating the young man took over there at Monroe Estates. My concerns is that we, as a community, sometimes look at the Black community and say, well, they decide to live a certain area, they decide to live a certain way, but no one wants to take responsibility. We were enslaved here in this country. And then we had segregation, where we couldn't go to school. There's only one school for miles. So our ancestors, our elders, are not well educated. And so each generation come up may become a little more educated through the community or some kind of help that they get. But on a mass scale, that's something we still have to break through. But the people who put us in a position stand back and just look at us and shake their heads, knowing that if it wasn't for being enslaved, if it wasn't for segregation, if it wasn't for preventing people from really going to school, that we would be a lot better off today than what we are. Now, that Moores Ford situation, they call it lynching, they shot 4 people, as far as I know. But the part that's really disgusting is ripping a baby out, the mother, and stomping it. Monroe has a legacy that it needs to change, that it needs to go in those communities and work with those people. There's no reason why the police department doesn't know who lives in that community and try to come up with some way of helping them. And as far as I read, it's 42% Black here. Is that represented on the police department? Is that represented in the fire department? Is that represented in the council? We got to equal things out. It's not our doing from where we at. We were put there. And then certain people want to just hold on to power forever and don't want to share. We say desegregation, but desegregation also means sharing power. We got to recognize the black community. We got to recognize what we've done to put them where they're at, and we got to come up with remedies so that we have more black policemen, more black firemen, more black people serving on council or commissioners. We're equal part just about of this community. And we just like for this community to reconcile the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. I appreciate you coming in from Covington. Moving to the public hearing on 350 Davis Street, we have a variance request. Mr. Stone?
Yes, this is a buffer variance request, a 75-foot impervious area.
Thank you. I'll declare this portion of the meeting open for public input. Is the applicant here? Ms. Krosik, would you like to tell us what we're trying to accomplish?
We're requesting the buffer to be reduced to 50 feet so that we can put the driveway to houses we're building through this additional 25-foot portion.
So no solid structure?
Well, it's considered solid structure because it's asphalt, it's a driveway.
Okay. No solid building structure?
No, that's not
Okay.
part of the plan at this point.
And am I correct, the state mandates 25 feet?
For the stream buffer variance is 25 feet. The impervious is 75 feet, and so code office, Mr. Kelly has jurisdiction over granting that, and so we do recommend it.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to the recommendation in a little bit. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak for or against that variance? Hearing none, I'll declare that portion of the meeting closed. And we'll move to the rezone at 0 Charlotte Rail Boulevard. Mr. Stone?
Yes, this is a request to rezone from B3 to PCD.
Thank you. I'll declare this portion of the meeting open. Is the applicant here? Would you like to come forward? Could you introduce yourself, please, Mr. Argo?
Sir, Mayor and members, Council, John Argo with MAB American. We're the developers of the proposed Monroe Pavilion. We've got before you tonight a request for rezoning, as Mr. Stone indicated, from B3 to PCD. Project has been vetted by city staff over a considerable long period of time. I think we're on a first-name basis with Rodney and most of them by now, Logan certainly, and had gone through Planning Commission most recently a couple of weeks ago, was approved unanimously. There was several conditions of approval imposed at that time that we had negotiated and accepted, and so we're really here before you tonight to see from a B3 to a PCD with, as approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission with those conditions of approval. We were going to defer our presentation to a later time of new business.
Right, we'll do that on the new business.
That's okay with council.
Yes, sir, that's fine. Do I have anyone here to speak in favor of this rezone, or anyone who may be against it? Hearing none, I'll declare that portion of the meeting closed as well. We'll be back to revisit both items in new business. Moving to department reports, Mr. Probst, City Administrator.
I'll be brief. The biggest change lately is we've finished up the remediation at the Town Green property. All that's been recompacted thanks to Jeremiah and his staff for working on that. From there, all the results and paperwork go back to the state EPD office, and then we're just waiting on certification to close that project out now.
I have a couple of questions about that project. I went over there while them guys were digging it, and what I was told was some fluid had actually came out in that ground. But he said he sent the picture either brown or rotten. Do one of y'all see the pictures that I was shown?
Me and my staff were only over on near the office, and we just dug a foot. We didn't go over to the big hole.
So nobody see the fluid that was actually
Yeah, it was,
drained in that?
it was the old oil, which had to be remediated. That's what they had to dig out, and so they ended up actually having to dig out a little bit more and disposed of it.
Did they actually mention to y'all that you shouldn't be doing no digging over that period? Because there is a problem with that land. What I was actually told when I talked to the guy, this need to be the only hole y'all digging because there's got to be trash all up and down this property. I'm sure that I'm not the only one that have heard all the kind of stuff maybe on that ground over there.
That's why we had full site testing done. I mean, we've got the paperwork that shows it. When they say trash, yeah, there's some concrete pieces and stuff from old buildings that were torn down over the years. So, I mean, that's not the issue.
So it was not told to you all, don't do any digging over that period.
No, the issue's the polluted soil that we're remediating.
No one have ever said anything about fertilizer maybe under that ground and all different types of chemicals?
That was the whole point of this entire exercise, where we had the entire property studied, soil tested, so on and so forth, to get to this step.
Because when I talk to them guys over there, they're doing their job. But at the same time, what was told to me, I would encourage y'all not to dig any further than where I am now. Unless y'all plan on bringing in dirt to level that off.
I haven't heard that. I mean,
I would just-
we'll end up leveling the property for sure before it's developed. Yeah, I mean, it'll have to be leveled out.
I found that interesting what they was actually telling me, where they didn't actually know who I were. I would suggest y'all look into that further before you try to spend another $1 million+ over there with that, whatever all you got planned on going over there. I was kind of disturbed by what the guy was actually saying about the ground and what all he thought might be under the ground if you dig any further.
And we don't have any plans to do any further digging. This was based on soil samples that were done, over the course of several months, and they were tested and retested. And then the areas that were flagged for remediation by the state, that's the areas we dug. That has since been closed up and then filled in. And then the state sends that certification back once this is closed out. The entire property was completely tested.
I hear what you're saying.
Thank you, gentlemen. Moving to the Central Services update, Mr. Bailey.
I'm fairly quick, too.
Thank you.
Just update, last newsletter went out May 31st that covered different facilities, our art guild, museum, some different things that were on there. There should be a Monroe-Walton County Airport newsletter that goes out sometime in August, I believe. I should have all the information done and send that out to everybody. On the police station, municipal court building, I'd actually had on there that I was going to show the design to staff tonight, but we kind of pulled that back based on the fact that we hadn't bid anything out yet, and we wanted to keep a lot of that kind of in-house. But if any of you would like to see it, you're welcome to stop by my office because I've got the plans in there. Facilities management, I just put together a little bit of a table to show y'all, and two, to thank you for allowing us to kind of repair and fix a lot of our facilities that have kind of went downhill a little bit. And the two that we had added that weren't budgeted for, even after those additions, were still under budget for the entire year, CIP. And I'll be glad to take any questions. That's all I've got.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Bailey? Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, sir.
Ms. Thompson, monthly finance report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. You have before you the financial status report as of May 2019. For May this year, we should be about 41% in revenues and expenditures, and I am happy to say that every fund and every department is about at or below where they should be right now, and there are actually some revenues that are above where they should be right now. So we are tracking as we should based on budgets. One thing outside of the financial status report, our utility billing conversion is still slated to go live the week of July 15th, so that's in about 2 weeks. We will be down as far as software goes for about 5 days. Our customers will not notice a difference. We will still be able to serve them. We'll still be able to take payments. We'll still be able to do new service and any interaction that they need with us. So they will not notice a difference in that and their day-to-day dealings with our staff in the customer service area. And I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Beth. Are there any questions? Moving right along. Monthly airport report.
All right, a quick update. Fuel sales, I think y'all show, it's about a week old. We actually had 91 transactions at the airport in the month of June. We sold right at 2,500 gallons, so it was a good month. Profited at the airport almost $6,000 for the month of June. And then project updates, July 11th is actually our closeout meeting for the East Apron. So everything's done on the punch list that we issued to the contractors. The final docket on that is we will be $45,000 under budget. And the total additional usable space that we added was close to 92,000 square feet on the apron side. So that added additional tie-down space, taxi lanes, and an open fueling area for planes to come in and out. The west taxiway is probably within about 2.5 weeks of being finished. So we'll be happy to get both of those off the docket, and we can start on what's the state's fiscal year 2020. August, I will bring before you our final interview results kind of for the new consultant engineers for the airport. We have 4 interviews and presentations scheduled for next week. For the people that submitted qualifications to become our new consultant. So I'll have that to you in August and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions? Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks.
Move into Mr. Smith, solid waste, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to highlight the May tonnage report. We hadn't changed much compared to April. The transfer station tonnage was up. We have an increase compared to last year, right at 979 tons compared to May of last year. We will extend again the Friday service to 5 o'clock in the month of July. Did have a surplus in May, close to $2,000. The 2 projects, both of them are pending right now. We still, one of them is ongoing, and the tipping floor, we want to push it back a little bit because we're going to go inside the building. We got some metal fabrication we got to do, and we want to make sure we get that completed before we actually go into that, on that floor. The other 2 things I have, just an FYI, the automated truck will begin here pretty soon, and we're going to have to incorporate that truck into the route system. It's an automated truck, fully automated, and we may have to make some route adjustments, so we will be notifying some of the customers that may be affected. We want to keep it to a minimum, and basically we don't want to have to shift days because we have to shift everybody, but hopefully our route design will allow us to just incorporate the truck and just do the work. And the only thing else I have is the Wednesday, Thursday customers are picked up tomorrow. Thursday customer will be serviced tomorrow. Now take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you, Mr. Smith. Streets and Transportation, Mr. Still.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unless there's questions over the report, I'll just give you some highlights of what we got going on. We're continuing to maintenance the right-of-way, cutting the grass. That side boom mower that we got a couple of months back has been wide open since we got it. It's been a wonderful asset in addition to our fleet. Really cleaning things up with it. We've been doing a lot of patchwork as far as potholes and utility cuts over the past month, and we will begin patching Alcovey Street, which is part of our 2019 LMIG work beginning Monday. So if you're in that area, expect some delays from traffic. One of those lanes will be blocked with intermittent traffic control beginning Monday, probably throughout that week into the next week, weather permitting. I'll be glad to take any questions.
Are we, correct me if I'm wrong, we're repaving Alcovey from the Methodist Church or from Broad all the way to the city limit,
That's
right?
correct.
Okay, in conjunction with that, Rodney, you guys who ran the sewer, we'll get to that in just a minute, but I've got a lot of compliments on the professional job that they did, and they were in and out quickly, and it was safe. But we do have some loose gravel that's still there, so if you would,
It's gonna remain loose. As long as it's not a hazard, it'll remain loose on the top until, we'll start on that end Monday patching.
okay,
And get it in, hopefully get to that specific spot on Monday.
okay, good, thank you.
And you'll put notification way back
Yeah, there'll be signs
From
all the way
each-
down to Broad Street.
and, okay.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Still? Hearing none, we'll move to Electric and Telecom. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mayor. As Beth said, everything's tracking pretty as it should in both departments. I got a few highlights I want to go over. Logan and I met with MEAG, I believe that was last week, to discuss our power supply. We meet with them once a year to go over what resources we have available to us. We are still a little bit long, which is fine. Some days we have to buy a little bit on the market. Some days we have to sell a little bit on the market. It's better than being real long right now and having to sell a lot on the market because the market's not doing too well in power sales. That is also tracking to be fine by MEAG's projections out for the next 18, 20 years with the resources we have coming online and some resources that may be going offline. Plant Wansley, coal plant in West Georgia, could be coming to a point where it's not economical for us to stay in that plant. But I'll keep y'all posted as those discussions go forward. The mill project, I'm not gonna call it a nightmare, but I am gonna call it a bad dream. I was down there again today, changing the direction of a power line because of infrastructure that was found in the ground that no one knew was there. It's moving forward, and everybody's doing the best they can. It is just, that mill's been there a long time. And there's a lot of pipe, mainly the amount of fire line pipe that is in the ground down there for that mill is just, you gotta work slow and careful around it, and it's everywhere, and there's not an accurate map. So it's moving forward. They have had a problem with their runoff water retention pond, the second one, but they've got that figured out. They have the machinery in to figure that out, to put that in place this week. So if you've noticed them, they're not doing a lot of dirt moving over the past several weeks. It's because they had to get that retention pond squared away, and they did get that squared away this week. We did spend some time in a couple of cities for the storms over the past few weeks, this past month. Mansfield twice and Elberton once. While y'all were at GMA, we spent almost 3 full days in Elberton. They had a small tornado, broke upwards of 20 poles. So us in Covington went over and helped them restore their power. It's just a good time to remind you how that agreement works between the cities. If our employees and our equipment goes to another city to help them restore their power or their infrastructure, that city pays for 100% of that cost from the time they leave our gate to the time they get back in our gate. And if we ever need them to come help us, we will have to pay them. But it's a much quicker return on getting your system back up using a city than having to hunt around for contractors and stuff. So that, one of the reasons we have to do that is the feds require us to have these intergovernmental agreements, or you'll never get a FERC dollar for your electric system. But they got good reports from the city of Elberton, from the mayor and their electric staff, and I was happy to see that. One way we notice how growth is going is by locates. Past 6 months, we've had over 500 locates per month. And that's locatable locates, not just locates called in. Those numbers have been in upwards of 700. We've been locating over 500 locates per month for the past few months. And so we're really moving with building. Moving on to telecom. IPv6, I've mentioned this in the past, the staff we've got our space. We're moving forward with getting that. Those are the addresses that you use to get on the internet. The version 4s are running out. We've got, I can't even tell you how many IPv6s, but we would have to 100 times our size to fill that up, but that's what they allocated us, the feds did. And then I get bad into doing acronyms. This USF is Universal Service Fund. It is a fund, a tax that is placed on phone service when you call from state to state. We first went in the phone business, that tax was in the 13-14%. We had very few people that actually called out of state. The way our phone is structured, if you call inside the state of Georgia, it's not long distance. But when you go outside the state, the feds don't care if you're calling it long distance or not. To them, it gets hit with Universal Service Fund. Well, that number has gone up to almost 20% of your interstate traffic. And our interstate traffic has grown to almost 70%, with just very few customers that are doing that. So staff and finance are working on a way to allocate that cost to the customers that are using that service. The customers that are calling interstate need to be paying that portion of that instead of the customers that are just calling around town and inside the state of Georgia. So we're working out a fair way to do that. It'll take us a month or two. I've got to wait for Ms. Thompson to get her new billing system in place before we can even figure out a structure. But I just want to make y'all aware that's coming down the pipe. And I'll take any questions you may have.
Brian, I just want to tell you what a council member from Elbert had sent me the message to let you know that they really appreciate what you and the city of Monroe actually done for them and the quick response you all actually had for Elbert County.
Well, I appreciate it. I really do. And those guys really appreciate it. They really went over there and did a good job.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Norman. Are there any other questions? Moving to the monthly fire report, Chief. Wait, I just missed you. Sorry, Rodney. I circled you before I passed. Monthly water, gas, sewer, and stormwater, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Just 3 quick updates. One being the Highway 11 South, the high-pressure main that we brought to you last month. That downgrade in pressure has been completed. The leak's still there, but it's was able to downgrade it from a grade 1 to a grade 3. So we bought ourselves some time to kind of look at that and see what our best option is. The Alcovey Street sewer rehab's completed. After Cameron, the sewer line along Alcovey only had one bad section, so that's been replaced. And then on our stormwater, Blaine Street, the curbing and the rehab of the ditches should be completed next week. And then once that's finished, we'll get started on the McDaniel section that we've got coming up. So if you got any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Ladies and gentlemen. Hearing none now, we will move to Chief Owens.
Thank you, Mayor. For the month of May, our number's a little bit lower than the previous months. I guess the May heat wave kept everybody inside where it was nice and cool. Overall, not much to report. We are done testing the fire hydrants through the city. At this point, we're just flushing and doing maintenance on the rest. Our new engine has been delivered. We do have it in-house. We're getting it ready, and we're expecting deployment within the next 30 to 45 days after we decal it, put the radio in it, get the training in with all of our personnel. And then one last note is we did get some concrete donated to the city by Brian, I'm going to mispronounce his last name, Oberschlake. They donated 7 yards of concrete to us for our training center, which was highly appreciated and needed. And that's all I have. Be happy to answer any questions.
Perfect, thank you. Are there any questions? I had the opportunity to go to a training last month, and it looks like we have been invited to join in the training in the fall. So if you want to jump into a burning building with me, I'm more than happy to have you. Thank you, Chief. Monthly police report, Chief Watts.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to point out, we had a little over 3,400 calls for service for this month. We had over 594 court cases, and significantly what I want to show tonight was on our Part 1, Part 2 crimes. Our Part 1 crimes are more serious, violent crimes, and we show in our data that it's down 47% from this time last year, which is pretty significant. We participated in over 11 community events. I do want to give a shout out to Liberty First Bank and Piedmont Walton Hospital, who both separately put on first responder luncheons, appreciation luncheons for just not us, but also the fire as well, and we're very thankful for that. Also, my lieutenant just had sent me a message here saying that the last 2 Thursdays in this month of July, they're going to be hosting active shooter training at the George Walton Academy, and invited all council members. They want to come out and participate and actually could be involved. I know Councilman Bradley's been a part of that before in the past, and see just how intense that can be as far as training goes. And as you all know, we had the unfortunate event that happened on June 15 at Monroe Estates. We still have an internal investigation going on within our organization, and we have GBI still conducting the criminal investigation. I'm hoping our internal affairs will be done by the end of this week. And as you already know, both officers have resigned while under investigation. And just to clarify, these officers resigning while they're under investigation, that has been submitted to POST, which is a Police Officer Standard Training Council. They will still have to go before that POST council to see if they keep their certifications to be law enforcement officers here in the state of Georgia. And I'll answer any questions if anybody should have any.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, quick question. Do the city make any recommendation whether they pull their certification or not?
Not that I'm aware of. Again, what POST will do, they will assign an investigator themselves that will come out and look at the totality of everything that took place. And then they'll go before POST council. It'll be a council just like this here today, and they will decide whether they keep their POST certification as law enforcement officers.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Chief. Moving to the monthly code report, Mr. Stone.
Yes, Mr. Kelly's out this week, enjoying some R&R, and so I'm going to go through some of the highlights of the code report this week, this month. I'd like to point out, as far as new businesses, there's 8 of them that have started up. If you look at closed business, it says 15, but if you look at that, slightly over half of them are in-home businesses, residential businesses, closed shop. So it kind of gives you more of an accurate picture of the business that we're talking about. As far as major projects, there's none permitted this month. Continuing projects is Silver Queen. They're making good progress. If you notice, they've started putting the rafters up this week. They have a tentative date of this fall, sometime near October timeframe, to be completed. And like the Main Street apartments on Broad Street, like Mr. Thompson talked about, and ran into some issues with some bad dirt on one of the retention basins. They're looking at fixing that. That has put the apartment complex a little bit behind date. They are still committed to the project. They're still committed to starting that component this fall. They may start some subwalls in before then. And as you can see, this past weekend, Murphy USA gas station opened up. They did a fine job of complying with the CDO, and they're open for business. If you look down to the bottom of the page, under the city marshal, they removed 37 signs from the roadway. We had 140 repair cleanup orders and re-inspections. There was 4 utility tampering and 4 theft cases with 4 citations issued. If you have any questions, I'll attempt to answer.
Are there any questions for Mr. Stone? Hearing none, Ms. Crosick, the Economic Development Report, please.
Thank you very much. The most important things on the report for this month is we do have July 4th fireworks in a couple days, and Athens Tech Field will be open, fire will be on site, but we don't have any other city-sponsored events. So it's really just for people to come watch fireworks and head back home or wherever else they're celebrating with families. And then this Saturday is our 3rd annual Housing Expo, Community Impact Day. This is something the city partners with the Walton Barrow Board of Realtors and Hope Monroe and a number of other vendors to really help empower and educate community members on how to become homeowners, the resources that are available because of our location, through it being a USDA rural zone, and a lot of other things that are available through Department of Community Affairs and other just local businesses and nonprofits to help people own homes if they would like to. And then you'll have a lot of other updates on here. Our DDA, Downtown Development Authority Annual Planning Retreat is going to be Thursday, July 11th. If there are any issues that you guys want to make sure that they talk about and tackle, please let me know prior to that. And you can see all the other events coming up. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Thank you, Sadie. Moving to the monthly parks report, Mr. Probst.
Thank you, Mayor. I've already hit on the town green update. Daryl Stone has been putting the final touches on the overall master plans for each park and some of those cost estimates. And we've been trying to meet with some various officials, whether it be the Corps of Engineers or with the state Department of Natural Resources or other departments to see about grant programs, et cetera, as we try to get these things moving. So it'll just be a matter of time. Hopefully in the next month or two, we can start unveiling those before you and with you and start going through them all. It'll be a pretty exciting time.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions? Moving to new business, I have an application for beer and wine on-premise consumption from Pizza Hut. Mr. Rosenthal?
That application is in order, Mayor.
Thank you. Is the business owner or manager here? Yeah. Could you step forward, please? Would you like to speak?
We just want to sell some pizza and beer. So,
That's a great idea.
we're ready. We just bought the Pizza Hut. So.
Well, good. Congratulations. Welcome to Monroe.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Comments? Motions?
I'll move we approve.
I have a motion to approve by Mr. Bradley. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Malcolm. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. That passes. Congratulations. We're glad you're here, man.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Next, we have an application for spirituous liquors and beer and wine on-premise consumption at L.R. Burger. Is Mr. Collin available? Mr. Rosenthal?
That application is in order, Mayor.
Thank you. And we're glad you're here, too. Any questions, comments for us?
Hopefully this goes as well as Pizza Hut.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments, or would somebody like to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve, Mr. Mayor.
I have a motion by Mr. Dickinson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Bradley. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. That passes. It was just about as easy.
It was just as easy.
Thank you, Chris.
When's your opening date?
We're hoping to get our CO by the end of July, August 1st, and then maybe a couple weeks of training and hiring and all that good stuff. But so sometime in August is what we're shooting for.
Hurry.
Looking forward to it.
Yes, absolutely. You all have a safe holiday. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You too, man. Thank you. Moving to the resolution for early Sunday sales, God bless you, of alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption. Question for the election, refer to Mr. Probst.
Thank you, Mayor. We're kind of in the time frame now where we can bring this before you to call for a referendum later this year for early Sunday alcohol sales. This basically pushes it back from 12:30 p.m. to 11 a.m. on Sundays. And essentially, we have to get your approval to pose the question on the ballot.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes, Mayor, I'll read the resolution. If this resolution is approved, then this question will go on the ballot for the general election, general municipal election that will be held on Tuesday, November 5th. We'll send this over to the Walton County Board of Elections, who manages our elections, and they'll make sure to get it advertised properly and placed on the ballot. This is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Monroe, Georgia, requesting and authorizing an election for the purpose of submitting the question of early Sunday sales of alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption to the electors for approval or rejection. Whereas a resolution authorizing an election for approval or rejection of whether the sale of malt beverages, wine, and liquor by the drink on Sunday should be allowed within the city limits of the City of Monroe was passed by the mayor and city council on December 6, 2011, and whereas the election concerning the above referenced referendum question was held on March 6, 2012, and the citizens of the city of Monroe approved the sale of malt beverages, wine, and liquor by the drink on Sundays within the city limits of the city of Monroe. And whereas Georgia Governor Nathan Deal signed Senate Bill 17 in 2018 as codified at OCGA 337, also known as the Sunday Brunch Bill or the Mimosa Mandate, authorizing restaurants and lodging establishments in Georgia to begin serving alcohol on Sundays at 11 a.m. rather than 12:30 p.m., subject to referendum vote by the city or county governing authority. And whereas the citizens of the city of Monroe, Georgia have indicated an interest in allowing the sale of alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises of restaurants and lodging establishments on Sundays from 11 a.m. until 12:30 p.m., in addition to the currently allowed sale of alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises on Sundays from 12:30 p.m. until 12 midnight, and whereas to allow the citizens of the city of Monroe, Georgia to determine whether the sale of alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises on Sundays from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., in addition to the currently allowed sale of alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises on Sundays from 12:30 until 12 midnight within the city limits of the city of Monroe should be permitted. The mayor and the council have determined that a referendum question shall be presented for a vote, and whereas the referendum question shall be presented in accordance with Georgia law as follows: yes, no, shall the governing authority of Monroe, Georgia be authorized to permit and regulate Sunday sales of distilled spirits or alcoholic beverages for beverage purposes by the drink from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Now therefore be it resolved that the mayor and the city council of the city of Monroe, Georgia authorize the city administrator to proceed accordingly to cause the election superintendent of Walton County to present this referendum question to the voters in conjunction with the city of Monroe, Georgia municipal elections to be held on Tuesday, November 5th, 2019. That is the resolution adopted this second day of July, 2019, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Are there any questions for Mr. Probst or Mr. Rosenthal?
I have a quick question. How hard would it be to actually to bring a liquor store to Monroe? Would it have to go through the same process? Because it seems like we don't have a problem with people drinking.
So liquor by the bottle or liquor under seal would also be a referendum question that would have to be presented to the voters. And then there's additional legal hurdles and issues about whether or not we would do a lottery, whether or not we would do limited numbers of permits. So it's the same concept, yes, Mr. Garrett, but it's a more complicated question for sure, but certainly one that if this council directs us to engage on the process, we'd be happy to. But it does also require a voter referendum, yes, sir.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Probst or Mr. Rosenthal?
Just a question. Assume this referendum goes on and assume the referendum passes. Does that automatically put that in place, or does that come back for the council still for a vote?
It would require us to amend our ordinance to comply, to authorize the sale for that additional hour-and-a-half period. So if the vote is in the affirmative on the referendum, then we would prepare a small amendment to our Chapter 6 of our alcohol ordinance, which we just updated last year, to allow for that additional sales period. So it would come back before you for the vote in the form of an amendment to our existing alcohol ordinance.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we get this on the ballot in form of referendum, or however I'm supposed to say that.
That's
Close enough.
perfect. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Ross Bradley and a second by Mr. David Dickinson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries, that passes. Full year 2018 PAFR, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the 2018 Popular Annual Financial Report, which is also known as the PAFR. This is a condensed, summarized version of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report that was presented last month, also known as the CAFR, for the audited financials of 2018. This has been presented to GFOA for the award for the, I believe, 14th or 15th year in a row, I'm not sure. I would go through some highlights, but I won't take up much time. It is available to the public, and it will be in our lobby and in our finance department, if anyone, and it's also on our website.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Are there any questions? And you said 15 years in a row we've won an award for this? This will be the 15th. Good, thank you so much. Moving to the next item, Verizon pole attachment agreement, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. This pole attachment agreement is very similar to the ones that we signed with Singular and Sprint. It is negotiated by ECG. It's a statewide contract for all the cities. It was the charge that was given us by the state legislature to do our business-to-business relations with these carriers, so they didn't have to do it for us. So I would ask you to please pass this pole attachment agreement. As I said on the email I sent out to all y'all the other day, the only one that has approached us so far is AT&T, and they are looking at a couple of aggregation points, not really 5G deployment, but aggregation points for congestion on their network, and they're actually very willing to work with us to use our network to pull that data back. At least the people that, on staff, people that came here were very, very open to that.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Thompson? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Point of clarification, just, we haven't had a chance to review this contract. I'm sure it's in good order from Mr. Floyd from Austin and Byrd, but if any motion be made, it just be subject to review and approval by our office.
Motion to approve the Verizon pole attachment agreement subject to review by council.
Thank you, Mr. Little, well said. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Malcolm. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. That passes. Variance for 1415 East Church Street, Mr. Stone.
Yes, the applicant has withdrawn. He is now planning on going straight R1. As far as the variance is concerned, he's withdrawn his application.
So in essence, that will be how many homes versus,
It'll be roughly 95, whereas before it was 80.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. I don't know that we typically comment on withdrawals, but does anybody have any comments? Hearing none, we'll move to the variance on 350 Davis Street.
Yes, this is a long-standing approved PRD, which has been reconfigured in the conformance of the approved zoning requirements. Essentially, it's a buffer variance. We do recommend approval. It's a little intrusion in the minimum that would allow for the development as currently configured, and the additional impacts have already been accounted for the water management plans. Like I said previously, it's impervious, which is the 75-foot. It doesn't touch the state 25-foot buffer area. So Mr. Kelly has jurisdiction to grant that approval, and we recommend approval. If you have any questions, I'll answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Hear any questions?
I move approval.
Thank you. Motion by Mr. Larry Bradley. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Adcock. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. That passes. Now, motion to rezone 0 Charlotte Rail Boulevard. I will invite Mr. Stone and Mr. Argo to come forward together, if you don't mind, please, gentlemen. And I will open the floor to council members for discussion and/or action. But prior to questions or comments, I know that we had some points made by the Planning Commission, which have been agreed to. And if you could go over each of those. Let you get started, Mr. Stone.
I can see.
Yeah, I just spent a couple hours on this. Thank you.
Okay, like I said, this is a request for the rezoning from a B3 to a PCD. We spent a lot of effort getting this as far as we have. It's been great working with the team that's bringing this product forward. The planning, the P and Z Commission folks, we've got approval. We've made some modifications I would like to bring out towards your attention so you see where we're going with it. If you look at the site plan briefly, what we have is a corridor from Charlotte Corral and the Highway 11. And then there's a boulevard road that crosses all the way across the property. We worked real hard with the applicant in putting in divided boulevards with median plantings all through the center, with roundabouts. Try to eliminate as many curb cuts as possible for now. One drive serves 2 lots instead of each lot serving one. The looking as you exit the property going from Highway 11 to Charlotte Corral, P&Z wanted to have a roundabout in this location, and I put in each one of y'all that submitted the traffic engineer's report regarding this. This was a hard sell that P&Z wanted to put in to this place, to this location, but the ultimate recommendation would not allow for this to go in this location. But the applicant had decided to go ahead and put the raised intersection into these locations, in these major locations, in the center of the property and one to the west of the property. Essentially, these are going to be concrete with brick inlays, and it functions similar to a speed table, but it's a platform to where it causes traffic calming patterns as the report allows and shows. So moving forward, those were the major issues that P&Z were talking about. Some of the stuff that we needed to finish, we've already got consensus on. We've met with the owner and the applicant and the engineering firms that are involved in this. And I'd like to go bullet by bullet through these, and that way, when we get to these, we can go back and forth with the owner, the applicant. John, just come on up right now when we talk about this. Sure. One of the first bulleted items, what we're looking at is a recommendation to approve the recommended amendments determined by the staff, planning, and zoning commission, and the city council suggested the following edits would be as follows. The first one was require the complete sidewalk network. Currently, the sidewalk network is on the north side of this the boulevard corridor, and they had proposed a 5-foot requirement to have 6 foot. They've agreed to do that. The south end of the project, they agreed to bond that so that when the out parcels develop, they will build that sidewalk as well. And we wanted to do this to make sure that there wouldn't be any interference with curb cuts, any grading, et cetera. So that has been agreed on. In addition to that, the total tree corridors are going to be planted as well, all through on both sides, north and south, so you're going to have a complete project. Also, we're still working out the final details, but he'll be putting in the individual lights that come along the streetscape as well. They're going to mimic our lights that are out here in our 11 Broad Street as well. And we'll look at potentially also getting the pole lights as far as the Highway 11 and as well as 138. So that all has been agreed upon. Apply ornamentation and fenestration standards for all street facades, including those facing Highway 78. If you look on the south side, all of these areas right here, go ahead, John, see what we agreed upon.
Is this working, Darrell? No.
Yeah, turn the.
Is that got it on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're talking about this outlot area. It has double frontage. It doesn't have access to Highway 78, but it does front on the retail boulevard that, basically, as Darrell indicated, is determined to be a parkway. We've agreed to four-sided architecture there that'll create basically a look of the side facing Highway 78 will look like a storefront, like a front of a building. It just won't have a door. So we've agreed to four-sided architecture there. Does that cover that, Darrell?
Right,
Okay.
and it'll have fenestration essentially similar to the front as the rear, so that when traffic comes by, it'll have also, the signage will be not as bold as the front, but it will be displayed on the rear as well. We talked about also the necessity of internally illuminated signage and eliminate internally illuminated signage for the anchors. And what in the CDO has been approved, and I'd like to make a comment too, that August 14, 2018.
Bless you.
We entered the agreement with MAB saying that they would comply with the CDO requirements. So in these lightings, what is approved in the CDO is the indirect lighting, and here's examples of this, and the halo signage lighting, and here's the examples of this. What is not approved in the CDO are the internally illuminated signage. And so I know Mr. Argo would like to talk a little bit about that. The majority of these, we can get compliance on that, as well as the majority of the buildings that are displayed right here, but he would like to add to the conversation as far as what the tenant requirements would be.
What I'd like to do is bring up Rick Maxian with Max Design Group. He's our lead architect for the project. And Rick, do you mind coming up and speaking to this? Before Rick gets here, just very briefly, the halo, what would you call it? Halo and the indirect lit would apply to the Shops A building, the Shops B building, all these pad shop buildings, and then the outlot area, which would include the two hotel pads. I think we had the notation there that, we'd endeavor to maintain corporate identity for those. So if we had a chain like an Outback or a Cheddar's or something like that, they could still have signage that's scripted in size the way that their business model calls for. With that, Rick, do you want to speak to the illuminated?
As he said, Rick Maxian, the architect, and we've been working with these tenants for over a year now. And unfortunately, we can't name any tenants, but a lot of them are national chains that are looking at coming here. And their branding, their character, their, how they present their store, the internally lit sign is what they use. And they use that pretty much everywhere, especially the two fashion tenants that are coming here. So, we've met with staff, we've been doing this for a while, and we've been able to manipulate some of the prototype design. We've introduced more stone, more brick into that, and we've gone into the stucco field more than the EFIS from that standpoint. So we've tried to work with the tenants in their prototype to bring it to Monroe, but signage is really hard for these guys to adjust to. They really don't like losing their indirect sign. That's just what they use. That's where they put all over. And again, they have their branding and their character that they use, and it's tough to get away from the major tenants. And when I say major tenants, I mean anywhere from what we consider a major to a junior of 5,000 square feet or larger. That's where our major and junior tenants are.
If it would help, I'd be happy to go I can identify stores kind of category by category. Would that help?
If you could, that'd be great.
This is just general retail shops that you will find in
Restaurants,
typical restaurants, services, general retail. This is the premier grocery store. They're offering, they're doing home delivery, click and collect, call ahead. They'll put the groceries together for you. Come curbside, they'll bring them out to your car and so forth. So they're kind of going omni-channel in addition to just the retail out the door. They're also servicing the folks that mobile order on their phone, and then also home delivery.
Right. That's a new service that they're just starting too within the past year.
This prototype for the grocery store is less than a year old. It's brand spanking new.
Yeah.
This is a small I think 4,200-foot general retail. That's the beauty supply, fashion, general merchandise, shoe, pets, sporting goods. That's fashion again, and that's a big fitness center. So we're at lease with everybody I've identified up there. So it's approximately phase one, this area in orange is about 215,000 square feet. This is a future phase that's being pre-leased right now. We hope to put that together very soon. We're basically ready to go with this development. We need to do the rezoning tonight if y'all find favor with that. Darrell, I guess the COA process is still ahead of us for a little more architectural detail and so forth. And then basically we'll be buying the land from the Rowell family, we hope sometime in September. And, as soon as we can get a grading permit, break ground, and this roughly is probably early year 2021 opening for the center. That's kind of the time frame that we're on. So we're hoping we can move this very quickly and get some hard hats on your heads and some shovels in your hands and get the paper out and the TV out and celebrate a great day for Monroe with a groundbreaking. That's where we're headed, but we understand we've got to touch each base as we go and make sure that y'all are comfortable that we're doing it in an appropriate manner.
One of the other items that we identified is the north-south access road that divides phase one from phase two. We would like to impose a 70-foot right-of-way that would be equivalent to the boulevard street for the future sidewalks, street landings, et cetera, can go. It needs to cross the MEAG and end right here at the right side of the gas pipeline. John's got some
You allow me, let me introduce Jennifer Lacerdo with Columbia Engineering. Jennifer is the lead engineer for the project. Would you like to speak to?
Sure. Hi.
Good evening.
A little short for this? There we go. I think I'm okay. Well, maybe, where's the pointer? Which one's the pointer? The red one? Okay. Okay, so what Darrell is talking about is this north-south access point here that separates our initial phase from the future phase here on the right. We've been asked to provide a 70-foot right-of-way. That would be the same width right-of-way as our parkway here. We would be willing to maybe give a 50 or 55-foot right-of-way for that, and the reason being is we don't really want to encourage this to be the parkway. We want the parkway to be along the front here as well. Also, making this a 70-foot right-of-way would eat into the square footage on the building on the initial phase here that you see here, and then it would also eat into not only the building but the parking and the building here on the future phase as well.
Jennifer, you know how many spaces we would lose?
On the future phase, we would lose about 54 spaces. On the initial phase, we actually wouldn't lose parking spaces, we would lose green space. I guess, well, we'd lose, the green space would go into the right-of-way, but we would lose, I think about, what did I calculate, about 10,000 square feet of building at the end because of the 70-foot width.
And we certainly understand the Rowell family owns a very large tract here that ultimately is going to be developed. I mean, this is definitely the path of growth in Monroe, and we think we're certainly going to trigger additional development. So it makes all the sense in the world to tie that drive through and allow this property to access the parkway and then get out to 11 or get out to Charlotte Rowell. It makes all the sense in the world. What we want to do is try to be careful and I don't want to create such a massive traffic separator in here that phase two doesn't feel connected to phase one. And so we think this, yes, it can be a public street. We think it probably ought to be maybe a little bit lower order street classification, which would merit a slightly narrower right-of-way. 55 is probably our max width there to accomplish that. We understand the city's request. And this is one of these details we need to get into a little bit more. I believe the city also wants green space here, which at 55 feet we can certainly maintain. And I'm sure to enhance pedestrian connectivity up and down here, the city would want sidewalk, which we have room to provide on this side. So we'll do our best to make that the best functioning public street we can and have connection between our property and then the future development to the north.
We could get potentially one sidewalk on one side of the
Yeah, I think your best bet is, like John said, on the left side of the road. Yeah, sorry. The green space that we have here on the left side of that access, we can certainly facilitate a sidewalk. We actually already show a sidewalk from my hand, this roadway up to the building. We've connected that pad building up to the shopping center. So we would just have to add a little bit of sidewalk in this larger green space there. So certainly, but on the future phase side, it would be a tight squeeze, and I don't know that a sidewalk would be, it'll be accommodated.
Okay, the whole site was evaluated and meets the 60% as far as pervious versus impervious area. But what would, in order to meet the full CDO requirements, we would need to reduce the outlot impervious coverage, and those are the lots on the south side.
Those would be the lots that are shown in yellow along 78 and on the southern side.
We've evaluated the whole entire site, and it does equal that, but once those get subdivided, that's one area that will not comply with the CDO once it's subdivided.
I guess what we would ask is the entire project complies. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Darryl. Well, the entire project complies, and we've, much like you do in a residential subdivision, a lot of times you might have smaller lots and consolidate the yards, so you've got green space that can actually be an amenity. We also have master detention here, so these outlots are not providing individual on-site detention ponds. We've consolidated them into a master formulation. So we think, given this circumstance where we've congregated all the green space in a particular area, and we have master detention for these lots that, yes, will be subdivided later, we would suggest to the city the way to look at this is, as long as the overall project complies with 40% or better open space, which it does, then we can still divide these off with somewhat more than 60%. I think most of them are in the 70 and 80% range. They're close to complying, but we would have to greatly oversize the lots, which we really hadn't designed them to do if we had to do otherwise, if we had to meet another interpretation. So we'd ask for an interpretation that, as long as the overall project meets the green space, open space requirement, that be sufficient, and we can proceed with dividing these off, even if they ultimately end up at 70, 80% or thereabouts.
The next item that is on the amendments would be the reduce the stucco facade. Actually, stucco is allowed, but the ephes is not allowed in the CDO requirements. We understand that they've come a long way. If you look at the drawings right here, the elevations, they've brick and stone and various types of fenestration. They meet all of that. But stucco is allowed, but the ephes is not allowed. So we would recommend, if they could possibly, if his tenants could bring the stone and brick further forward, and just the cap portions with the overhangs be the ephes or stucco, we'd be willing to entertain that. But again, John's got some more constraints regarding that.
Yeah, again, getting into the tenants, what we've done is we have increased the brick, as Darryl spoke. When we first came in here, which, I don't know, several months ago, we had a lot less stone, a lot less brick, and we followed the prototype of these major tenants. After meeting with Darryl and several of the staff members, we have increased that brick amount. The stucco to ephes ratio is based off of their signage area. What happens is we're using stucco pretty much everywhere on these facades except for where the signs are. And the reason for that is none of these tenants want to see reveals at their signs. It deteriorates from the visibility of their sign. So what we've done is we've eliminated the stucco in that area, just in the area where the signage is. So it's kind of like a signage ban, if you would. And that's where the ephes is. Then, of course, we have ephes at our cornice, because how you form ephes is with foam. And in order to get the projection of the cornice, you need that foam. And it sounded like you guys were okay with that, if I understand that. Oh, yeah, let me, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Sorry, let me. Okay, so for instance, this is the grocery store that John was speaking about earlier. So you can see where we have the signage area. That would be the ephes portion right there, because the reveals is what, so if you don't put reveals in your stucco or your ephes, you're gonna have cracking. There'll be cracking. So to figure out the percentage, stucco is usually around 150 square feet. Anything less than that, you're gonna have cracking somewhere. ephes spans all the way out to, you can go 30 feet spanses, 40 feet possibly, depending on the amount of foam you have. So what we've done with this elevation right here, as you can see, the red is the indication of the brick. Sorry, I know it's hard to read the tags on these. Oh, yeah, I guess I could point. So right in here, this is all brick and stone, right down here. This is fiber cement, which is the canopy that projects out. So we have fiber cement there and then fiber cement on our columns. This area right here is your stucco. This is your stucco, this is your stucco. So the ephes is contained in this area, then of course at your cornice. Again, because with ephes it's easier to build out a foam and create your cornice from that standpoint. Again, so you'll see here, brick, we brought the brick up in these elements right here. This is I think it's a cosmetic store. Then you have stucco here and stucco here, and ephes is only right here and then at the cornice. So again, it's the signage areas where we're trying to contain the ephes to.
I do want, let me go back one, Rick. If you can see, the other thing about the ephes, we understand, you may not want to use ephes in a large expanse, so that's why we've got the stucco. And the ephes is a little bit easier for constructability for signage. The other thing we want to point out is you see the signage itself actually covers up the bulk of the ephes. So when you're looking at that, you're not looking at a blank ephes wall, so to speak, or blank ephes panel. You're looking actually, what you see is that sign. Your eye doesn't move to the ephes behind it. So it's really a very de minimis usage of that, and only in the area of the sign bands. And so that's what we'd like to lift up to you tonight and say, if you can improve that, then we're using brick, stone, the fiber cement, and the stucco, and using ephes just as trim and just as the sign bands. That would be consistent with the tenant prototypes that they dictate really to us how we have to build the store. They give us a set of tenant guide plans, and that's the store we build, and then we adapt it to the local codes and the local architectural design, and that's where we are tonight. So that's, again, de minimis use of ephes and just basically behind the signage that projects out.
Just one more point I should have pointed out. With the stucco and the ephes, it's the same finish. So the finish will be the same. You won't be able to walk up and go, wow, that's ephes, that's stucco. The finish will be the same for both products. It's both made by manufacturers of Dryvit or Finestone or whatever. So you'll get the same finish from both of them. Yeah, it is a textured finish is what we use here. We don't use a fine because it's so hard to patch the real fine stuff, so it will be a textured. It's not a scrape-on, kind of like they did in the 70s. It's a textured finish.
Thank you, Mr. Stone.
Yes, I skipped one. It's augment the green space with the parking lots to sufficiently break up the asphalt areas. See if I can find which drawing this one was on. 2.3. Yes, if you look at the center portions in front of the retail stores, you'll notice that you got these landscape strips. Right here, as you can see this strip coming north to south, every fourth bay of parking, you're supposed to break that up. What we're requesting is to have additional landscape strips to break up that asphalt. And I know Jennifer and I have already discussed this, and we've got some other options. If she wants to talk more, and she studied it more, I'd like her to come and present.
Good evening again. Okay, so the requirements for internal landscaping for the shopping center itself per the CDO is 12%. Currently, as shown, we're at 13% landscaped area. So we actually do meet the code. What Daryl has requested is that we add or increase the size of our landscaped islands through here, which we could do in some areas, but we do lose substantial parking. We would probably could lose up to 40 parking spaces, which wouldn't look favorable for the tenants. And then as far as the canoes, we added the canoe islands and connections from our pad buildings up to the retail centers on the sides. We did not add it in front of the grocery because they do not like that because of the carts that have to traverse across the parking lot.
Are the canoes, will they have sidewalks?
They, most of them do. Let's see, the one in front of Shops A does not. You know what, let me look at my own hard copy. I can't even see that far. Most of them do, but not all of them. We've given, okay, so looking at this long canoe here does have a sidewalk from the parkway all the way to the main retail space. We have a sidewalk, like we talked about before, from this pad building all the way to the retail space. And then from this pad number 2 all the way to retail, we do have a sidewalk. And I believe this one does not have a sidewalk right here between the grocery and the other retail. So 3 out of 5 of them do have sidewalks that go up.
And one of the things I know the code kind of talks about, you know, every certain span, but we're trying to have connectivity between the pad buildings and these pad buildings are typically occupied by the chicken salad chicks, the Tzatziki's, the Zoe's, the Chipotle's of the world. And so we expect a lot of cross-traffic from employees and customers that park their car, go to the store, then run down and get something to eat coming or going. So in distributing how you distribute the splines, we're trying to tie those pad buildings back to the individual row of retail stores. So there's a lot of, I guess, design elements that sort of compete for what's the best way to kind of put green landscaping and sidewalks through the parking lot. So we're hopeful that this alignment, we think, maximizes that back and forth cross traffic, which is important to the success of both these stores and these foods. And we hope that, and we kind of left this up to you, is since we comply overall percentage-wise, that you would let us to distribute the traffic or distribute the pedestrian traffic across the parking lot in that way.
Additionally, I would like to say they did come back and, as per request, if you look at the sidewalk that connects all the buildings, we requested to put green space in between there with planters that can be landscaped, with benches and trash receptacles, and all of those are all along the front face of that.
We have, are they in the architectural ones then?
It's the last, is at the very end.
Okay, excuse me, I'm gonna scroll through here. We have some detailed vignettes to show you for that area. Oh, here we go. So this is in front of the Shops B elevation, which is between the beauty and the grocery. The green area that you see up here, we've shown some planters and then some, you know, benches and trash receptacles. And we've done that along the front, in front of different tenants. And it's hard to see on the site plan, but we've done it across the frontage. Let's see, here's another major B. It's got a planter area here, again, with some bench, you can, you know, able to put a bench and trash receptacles.
The next one was to make the South Storm Water Management Pond a water feature with aeration fountain and landscape, and appoint this as an amenity with a little walking trail and some benches. And they've agreed to do that as well. Just need, like I said, all these items need to be finalized in the pattern book.
Darryl, that's this
Yes.
one front and center here. is what
That's
you're speaking
correct.
of. Correct, okay.
There's one thing that didn't make the list, but it's paramount that we gotta have, would be the location of the traffic signals on the site plan shall have DOT letter of approval, as well as proposed road cut locations. We need the state letter of approval that they can come east and west to come across that site, and a letter stating that from DOT, and John's working on that as well.
Yes, as you see on each end of the parkway connecting here at Highway 11 will be signalized. This location here at Charlotte Row will be signalized. This is the existing signal for the ramp, exit ramp coming off 78 to Charlotte Row. these signals, I guess, will have to be coordinated as well. We've done a traffic analysis by Wilburn Engineering that designs these signals. We're confident, based on the traffic analysis, they'll meet signal warrants. We've been interacting, Logan, Kevin Little, and some others have been interacting with us and the Georgia DOT. We have another meeting actually next week on this. But this center will not be built and not operate without signals, and we'll have responsibility. I think there's some joint responsibility for the signal here, and then we'll have sole responsibility for the signal at this point. That's being actively moved through the DOT process for meeting traffic signal warrants and such.
Again, what the planning staff has recommended is approval with these amendments, and a lot of them have already been achieved. At this time, if y'all have any questions, please direct them to myself or John.
I know we're going to have some question. Who wants to go first?
I'd be happy to jump in. Going back to signage, because I think that's as important to me as it is to your retailers. You mentioned the 18 red parcels up there. Out of the 18 parcels, how many are looking to have the backlit or internally lit signage?
Internally? 12.
I don't remember the fancy name for the color, so I'll call it off-white. But what phase is that wrapped into?
The out parcels, you mean? These out parcels down here?
I think y'all referred to them as outlots.
Down here, yeah, outlots. As they get leased, they'll come in, so they'll move forward with the project as you know, whoever, Texas Roadhouse or whoever comes in and leases that. So they're not phased like phase two, they're gonna be sold initially too. However that works.
One other thought too, just in seeing these developments, some right down the street. I think this is what, a 3-year project? Potentially, maybe 5?
You talking about to get the entire thing built out?
Yeah, to be completely finished.
I think that's fair. Fairly good.
So what is the plan for maintaining everything around it to not look grown up and like just a rundown empty lot? Because I know that I see that a lot at these big developments that haven't been developed in 10 years.
Well, you know, this is Royce Bradley. He's our construction manager for MAB. They'll want you.
Yeah.
Well, what we typically would do is we have to comply with, you know, the erosion control measures that we're required to do, which force us to grass the outlots, and we would certainly do that. And our management company that we would have running the shopping center on a day-to-day basis would be responsible for keeping that mowed and cut at whatever interval was necessary to make it presentable, because our ultimate goal is to sell these out parcels, and, you know, we certainly need to maintain the maintenance on those for our shopping center to be successful.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
Thank you,
I should
Russ
have said at the
Bradley.
beginning, I can't even imagine how much work has gone into this. So I appreciate that time. I had one more question that slipped in my mind. So if anybody else wants to jump
We'll
in,
be here a while.
yeah, I'll come back to it.
Lee?
What's I know the minimum use of the EFOS, is that the EFOS, and you said it mimics the stucco. Tell me why we've got that in our OCD.
Well, they're, like kind of Rick was saying, they're all kind of a drive-it type system. If you look at the CDO, the intent to have stucco is based on what historically is in our town. If there's an Art Deco or religious center where they use that, that's why they approve stucco. EFOS has not been approved, and if Paul wants to respond to that, I don't know exactly why there's not EFOS approved.
Well, I think you hit on it for what the CDO requirements are. It's the spirit of what the architectural standards of the town are. That's the main reason it was codified, and I know that predates both of us, and I know Paul worked on that as far as the legal aspects. But anyway, that's why it was, tied into this standard. As far as the maintenance requirements too, I think we've seen some EFOS products around town that have not been
So is it the dry that has the problems with water, moisture retention and all that?
No, it's absolutely the application. Every time it's the application. They just didn't install it correctly. The system drive it itself has a rain barrier behind it, so no water should ever stay behind that. It's purely application, and that's what EFS got. If you remembered in the 70s in Florida, when it was falling off walls, it was the application. It was not the product itself. But what Logan says is exactly right. That's why most municipalities use the stucco, is because of the tradition that's involved with the stucco. And we have no problem with that. We'll absolutely put stucco everywhere we can if we could just put the EFS where the signage is.
Councilman Malcolm, if I can just give you a little bit of background, and I'll just read from this council's zoning ordinance. And the issue is found in our corridor design overlay standards, section 643A.2, sub 1, sub C, sub 7, materials. And it goes to the historic character and style of the town. And brick and wood siding are the most common traditional building materials used in the city of Monroe. Brick is the preferred exterior material. Materials having a wood siding appearance, such as hardy board or hardy plank, are compatible substitutions, provided that the proposed reveal is similar to that of existing historic examples. Aluminum and vinyl siding are not permitted. This prohibition includes metal building types commonly known as Butler buildings. Stucco, not including EFS, is acceptable in limited areas, for instance, parapets, or as a full exterior surface for architectural styles and forms reflecting the city's historic architecture that traditionally utilize stucco. So I think Mr. Stone's answer is correct if it was historically an Art Deco building, but when the code was passed, the decision was made to move away from predominantly stucco retail fronts, and the terminology is found in that section of your code.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal.
I have a question, Mr. Stone, because if I heard you at the end there, you said staff was recommending approval of this with the adoption of the recommendations. However, the adoption of the recommendations, I understand from the developer, is those are not all possible, so they varied from some of those. So what is staff recommendation at this point?
Well, the approval would be recommended, the amendments that we just listed down through here, and there's one that didn't make the list, but it was with the DOT approval of the light applications with the curb cuts going into the roads.
Some of these that are listed here are no longer.
That's correct. They're not in the pattern book. They didn't have a chance to get it revised so that it's in the pattern book.
Oh, but I mean things like, for example, this says the 70-foot right-of-way.
That's correct.
Is they're saying 55 is what the.
That's correct.
So is your recommendation now for approval based upon what they've told us tonight?
Yes.
On all these things?
Not all these things. Going back to the CD, the 70-foot is not in the CDO. That's just a recommendation if we could get it. We wanted to make sure that we'd be able to have pedestrian access, and it needs to go on up to the northern corridor for connectivity. So if 55 still gets us what we want, and if it's studied to where they can provide the connectivity, also provide the tree plantings with sidewalks so we can have walkable from the balance of the project going north, then yes, we would study that with that recommendation of 55.
My point is, I'm not sure what you're recommending.
I understand.
Well,
And that, go ahead, David.
let me jump in a minute. Because I'm struggling a little bit to figure out how close we are on some of these things. And these aren't numbered, so I was having a little trouble keeping up with some of them. But as I understand it, the first two, we're in complete agreement on. That's the sidewalk network and the ornamentation fenestration standards. We're in complete agreement on that, right?
We are in agreement, but it's not been stated in the pattern book.
But it's got to be.
Yes, it has to be.
All right. Mr. Argo, is that correct? We're in agreement on that one? Those two?
That's
The sidewalks.
The sidewalk is the 6 foot, both sides.
Is the 6 foot both sides, and on the 4 sides architectural on the south side of the.
All right. So then the next two, 3 and 4, deal with the sign illumination. And as I understand it, Mr. Argo, what you're saying is that you're getting blowback from some tenants who say what they always say, which is, well, I built a store in Nevada, it had this. If I'm gonna build it in Monroe, it's gonna have this. And I just gotta tell you, my inclination would be to stick with our requirements on the signage. I don't think they're gonna walk away over something like that. I think they will make the accommodations. And if they don't, there'll be another retailer right behind them that will. I don't think any of them are walking away. And I feel pretty strongly about that. There's a reason we put those requirements in. It has to do with what developments look like. We have held a lot of other people's feet to the fire on these things. Not nearly as big a project as this. And as you know, I'm a major proponent of your project. I made the motion to move forward with it. But big or small, I think we need to treat everybody the same, and I just don't see any reason to deviate from those requirements with respect to the signage. So moving on.
Can I ask one question to clarify? Was it 12 of the 18 wanted the signage and lighting that did not conform?
Correct.
12 of 15, I think. Is
12 of 15.
I don't know if I counted right. I thought I counted 18 red buildings, but 12 total want the backlit, or the interior lit sign.
May I comment? There's a comment. And we understand, you know, we don't, I mean, the city's has made a lot of effort to put this design ordinance in place. And, you know, and we understand the intent, we understand the spirit, we don't find fault with that. It's the arena I'm in today, the retailers today are very skittish about opening any kind of bricks and mortar store. They're watching Amazon build million-square-foot fulfillment centers ring in Atlanta. The 2 fashion department stores, one of them 2 years ago was building a 36,000-foot store. That store is 21,000 today. The 18,000-foot store, its 2-year-old prototype is 30,000 feet today. They are coming out with new prototypes to meet a new world of e-commerce.
I understand that.
And so all that to say is they are very skittish. I don't really have any, I can tell them what you might want them to do or impose. We've run that by them, and we understand their position. Unfortunately, the plan will fail if we go back to them and say the city, there's no leniency, there's no flexibility there. They have a very narrow margin for error now. They have a business formula that they've decided for success, and they're willing to bring that to Monroe. There are a lot of benefits and I just want to keep those in mind.
Okay, but aren't they in essence saying that nobody will go to their store if they don't have their type of lighting as opposed to what we impose on others? That doesn't make any sense to me, really, but.
And I understand why it might not. It's just, I'm just saying, having done this for 33 years, these deals are extremely difficult to get done today. The signage, they basically dictate it to us. We're trying to say to you, we'll have it as proper as we can on the best looking building we can, but I don't have an alternative to offer there, unfortunately. Most of these big retailers are building, 75, 80, 100 stores a year. And, it's easy not to come to Monroe and put that store somewhere else. And I want to stress to council, if that's the sentiment, that's the prevailing sentiment, that jeopardizes this deal. Maybe it shouldn't, it's just that's the context we're in today. And I'm sorry I can't say anything more encouraging than that, but that's my response.
Okay. All right, so then on this connector, as I understand what we're saying is the city can live with the 55 as opposed to the 70.
You just won't have a sidewalk on both sides, you'll just have it on one side.
All right. But my personal feeling is that would be okay. And I don't really have a problem with the out parcel impervious coverage, because I think the whole project meets the overall standard, so I don't really see that as an issue. How big a deal is the augmented green space?
According to the new drawing that they have posted here, the things that we're not going to end up getting, and it's because of what they talked about as far as the out parcels that you see on the lower south end, we won't have those strips, but as far as meeting the density of percentage that's in the CDO, it would comply.
And can you go ahead and bring in, so speaking of the green space, talk about the detention pond?
I mean, yeah, we're all in agreement with the retention pond being a aeration pond that will have a, we'll put the criteria, such as the fountain height with multiple streams, 15, 20 foot tall, et cetera. And they don't have a problem putting, that lower south side would have a sidewalk with several benches and it'd be planted up to where it would be a place where folks could sit, et cetera. Then the owner's in agreement with that.
So then, on the stucco and the ephes, and I do have some familiarity with those, with the ephes. So I understand the historical aspect of it, but to me, it doesn't make a material difference, basically. So I don't have any problem really with what you're proposing for the ephes. Right. Then, did we have an agreement on the berming and screening along Boulevard?
Yes, when we ended up getting the median planters in for the parkway, those would be the screening that would help, and typically we berm those up.
So we're
be
agreed on
planted, and
that.
that would help break that visually up.
We're agreed on the water management pond, and we're agreed on the traffic lights and the DOT requirements. So basically, I think we're just down to this thing about the lighting, and I just really find it hard to believe that those tenants can't show some flexibility,
Well,
I'm going to respectfully disagree with my council member. I don't think we should make a lighting issue defining factor about if we're gonna bring a company or business to Monroe with that size. I think we need to be more flexible when it comes to people spending their resources trying to help the city of Monroe actually grow. We've been talking about a grocery store look like for 15 to 20 years. We haven't got close, and it seems like at this point, we're closer than we've ever been. I don't want to see us sit up here and nitpick about little lighting, buffers, of planters, a little minor minute stuff that can actually go one way or another. I think we need to be trying to figure out a way to be business friendly with the people that's willing to actually invest in our hometown. So I'm going to say that I don't think we should really push an issue about a lighting, because I would tell you, even though we think they may come, if we worry about lighting, when people spending their own money, it's up to them to make that final decision whether they will or won't come. And little small stuff like this can make a deal or break a deal. And we definitely do not want to break a deal if they're that close to actually getting this pulled off. I think the guys have did a lot of work over the last few years to try to get this situated, and I don't think we should be on this council trying to nitpick little minute stuff that said basically if you don't do this, then we're going to vote this way. Well, one thing about this council, everybody got an opinion and everybody got a vote. We got 9 council members, and everybody get an actual chance to share their opinion with their vote. I would say we really need to move forward, and it seems like that the city is on board with 85 or 90% of what y'all have agreed with. Is that correct? So I don't see a reason that we should be trying to take this other little 5% or 10% and stop this project from actually going forward. Those are my 2 cents. Thanks.
And I can appreciate what Mr. Garrett had to say. The 12 that have the interior lit signs, are they all national? Can we cut that to 6 and say, okay, big national chains, we got to let you have this, but you 6, sorry, you're 5,000 square feet or less, you're going to have gooseneck signs.
I think where we've tried to define it, Rick, is if you're 5,000 feet or less, you have to do the halo. I don't know if y'all saw the halo lighting.
Yes, sir.
The indirect lighting, you've seen that with the gooseneck, and there's other ways to do it well. And that executes well and is very attractive. So that's kind of the cutoff, was below 5,000 feet. The national tenants on this plan are all 5,000 feet or bigger. So that's kind of a logical, if that's what you're saying, Mayor, that's kind of a logical place for the demarcation.
Okay.
What I would say about the signage, I mean, it's something I'm passionate about, but I do understand that the one person who would make that decision isn't in the room right now, and that's the retailers. So for me, another thing that caught my attention was where it talks about reduced stucco facade coverage to a maximum range of 10 to 12%. The elevation drawings you showed, are those current?
Yeah.
And that's the plan to move forward with? Because to me, and I obviously don't have a scale ruler in front of me, but it seemed like 50 to 75% of the facade was stucco. So either I'm interpreting that wrong, or there is no plan to reduce to 12.
No, our understanding, I don't know where Mr. Stone is, their understanding was to minimize the EFS, because stucco was a permitted material. And so we were using the stucco, and all we were saying was the only place we were going to use the EFS was on the sign band, where it would be behind the sign. I mean, what you're going to be looking at is the sign and not the EFS. So we may very well get close to that percentage.
So is this stated incorrectly, or am I just not understanding? I understand what you just said, but what I'm reading doesn't read that way.
Based on the CDO, the stucco is permitted based on the historically what's around in the town, kind of like what Paul had read.
Well, and that's what's,
Art Deco, religious centers that may use that type of stucco.
to say only on the parapets, on the facade, and this was the entire storefront of I believe it was minor D, E, and F, major D, E, and F, were entirely stucco with a little bit of a, I don't know if it was a brick accent or what, but it seemed to be reversed from what the CDO says. So again, going back to what David said, I just want to know exactly what we're talking about, because at the end of the day, this is a groundbreaking, well, I guess earth-shattering would be a better term.
So brick stone or fiber cement, my understanding is the fiber cement could substitute for brick or stone also. So that is up to the top of the storefront at every store. So and above on others. So it's probably in the 50% range, maybe even pushing 65 for the brick for these tenants. So at that point, the stucco EFS is sitting around the 40%. That's correct.
Okay. So what were you mentioning about in the CDO about the stucco requirement?
I was simply reading to you where this requirement comes from in your zoning ordinance, where it says that brick is the preferred material and that stucco should be is acceptable only in limited areas, for example, the parapet, or as a full exterior surface, it is if it's going back to an architectural style that would be historic, such as Art Deco. So I think if I can help clarify, the recommendation that's on the form of reducing the stucco to a maximum range of 10 to 12% was a recommendation from staff to bring the prototypes into compliance with the stated goals of the CDO. But I think what I'm hearing the applicant say is no, they want to leave it at more of a 60-40 split as opposed to a more 90-10 split, if you will.
I mean, again, I know this has been a long time in the works and y'all have put forth a ton of effort, so I'm not sitting here saying that I would be against it for the sake of an interior lit sign or stucco. But what I'm reading here that has been put in front of me, we danced around 9 out of the 10 topics. And it says here, approval with recommended amendments. But none of these are what we've actually discussed as being something that y'all are willing to do or we're willing to bend on. I don't want to be an adversary for the project because I'm excited for it to be here in Monroe, but I have a hard time of it kind of being up in the air on some of these things. So,
Well, again, like I said, when we met with staff months ago, the prototype drawings call out brick at a water table. That's it. That's where the prototype drawings have.
So that was our first rendition that we brought in to Daryl and staff.
Right.
So at that point, that was probably 90-10 the other way, is what a lot of these prototypes pushed. So now we've pushed that up there. So you talk about bending, we have bent. We've gone up to the 50 to 60% range for our brick or stone or fiber cement from that standpoint. So we're increasing that, and we're working with again, the major tenants, the minor tenants, the national chains to work with their prototypes from that standpoint.
And I get that. I don't know if at this point, if it's appropriate to, is it appropriate to negotiate these things back and forth? Because I understand that you did bend from what the original brick table looked like, the prototype drawing. But here it says, reduce stucco facade coverage to a maximum range of 10 to 12%. So I'm just curious if that was a clerical error on the entry of this form that I'm reading, or if y'all are gonna get to that point.
Or is it something we can live with, Mr. Stone?
Yeah, or
This was this was just a staff recommendation based on our CDO.
Can I come back to my original question?
Yes.
From a staff recommendation standpoint, is the staff in agreement with what they presented tonight? Or do you, I'm coming back to Ross's thing, or do you still say this needs to be 10 to 12%?
We're stating that it needs to be, in order from a zoning ordinance perspective on our CDO, we're saying that this reduced the stucco facade to a maximum of the 10 to 12%.
So the staff is not in agreement with
We're not in agreement on that particular point.
That's like Daryl said, is we're going by the book on this, bringing it to you based on staff's analysis and recommendation. Now, you're the governing body and of course can negotiate and deviate as you see fit. But that's why we outlined all of these elements within our ordinances. Secondly, there's going to be a certificate of appropriateness on this project that will have to go back before planning and zoning and then council as well. So the intimate details of this project will have to be looked at again, or it's not going to go anywhere.
So can we strike the stucco recommendation from this altogether for the rezone?
Well, then it could be 100% stucco.
No. I mean, just because that's gonna go in the overlay district, that review. So, Paul?
If the council was desirous, let me give a little bit of overview on this because this is a multi-step process for this project to come out of the ground, meaning there's other things that will happen before you and other things that would happen before the CDO board. If the council was desirous of making a motion to approve a rezone subject to certain conditions, then the rezone would go through subject to certain conditions. Those could be listed and they could or include or not include that one particular line item that you're looking at. Additionally, the rezone would be subject to the pattern book that they've submitted, which is sort of their guideline of where they are right now. A couple of extra layers just to lay it out there so everybody understands is it would be subject to approval of a development agreement. That's required by the plan, commercial district zoning ordinance. It would be subject to approval of the code office by a landscape plan, not just sort of, the drawings, but specific landscape plan. That's required under the CDO portion of the ordinance. It would then go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission in their function as the Corridor Design Overlay Commission for approval of a COA of this plan. And that would not come back before you unless for some reason they didn't approve it. But it would come back before you again for a subdivision approval, meaning the final plat would have to be approved for subdivision because this is considered a major subdivision under our development regs. Additionally, legal recommendation would be that if any rezone is made based upon what you have before you now, our recommendation would be that it also be subject to phase 2 and any outlots would be required to come back before you because you don't have specific plans on them. Meaning the concept and the purpose of the PDDs, the planned development districts, are that when it is rezoned to something, PCD, PPD, there's a full plan before you and you know what you're approving. The plan that's presented to you now has phase 2 and the outlots, I believe 1 through 11 or 12, as sort of white boxes. And so I don't think that you can appropriately approve those. You can rezone the whole project to PCD, but those particular outlots would have to come back before you for final approval of a single plan for that PCD because you don't have one. So it's a very long answer to say you can strike that one condition if you want to. Staff gave you their recommended list of conditions, and y'all can approve as many of them as you want, or you can add 10 others or not add any at all. Our recommendation would certainly be that it be if you make a motion to approve, that it would be subject to a development agreement, subject to those other things I said, and subject to their plan pattern book that they submitted, I think, about a month ago, because that's sort of their Bible right now on how it's to be built.
So if we were to strike the stucco portion of this recommendation, it can still go in front of the overlay district and the certificate of appropriateness. That's still going to be, they can move forward. We can allow them to move forward and revisit that.
The corridor design overlay would have the discretion to approve or deny the certificate of appropriateness.
So that would allow us to move forward without saying yea or nay on this one specific item.
Certainly.
Okay.
It reverts back to what's presented here tonight in their pattern book, essentially.
And if you go back to the lighting, the staff says to require alternatives to internally illuminated signs or building faces and show cause for the necessity of internally illuminated signage or eliminate the internally illuminated signs. So I guess, Daryl, do you say that they're showing cause by what the statements made tonight from these?
His cause was to say that the big box vendors are not willing to bend, so that was showing his cause for that.
And I can certainly understand that.
If we wanted a motion made tonight to approve the zoning change, based on the responses that we've heard from Mr. Argo and other people there, and the things that Mr. Rosenthal, subsequent things he talked about. If we made that motion and it passed, and then when it comes back to the Card Overlay Commission, they could override some of those things at that point in time. Is that correct?
That is correct. They could deny the certificate of appropriateness on particular issues such as the stucco or parking or any of those sort of things. And if they did, then this applicant or any other applicant's next step would then to appeal that decision.
But
It
if
would
the
be back before you again.
If the applicant did not appeal, in other words, if the Card Overlay Commission adopts something and there's no appeal from the developer, we would not see it again.
Correct. As to the aesthetic issues, you're going to have to see it again
On the CF.
The development agreement.
on approval of the final plat. Now, there's an alternative way to where it wouldn't have to come back before you again. If they had submitted their plat with this, y'all could have considered it as part of the Planned Development District zoning action, but they have not submitted a final plat. So the technical drawing's going to come back before y'all at some point regardless at this point.
So, Mr. Stone, I guess I would ask, if we wanted to go that route, can you specifically state what these recommendations would then be?
Well, I've brought the recommendations specifically in front of you. We would have to amend the ones that, if you agreed with Mr. Argo's, such as the right-of-way, such as the stucco maximum range between 10 to 12% on the facade coverages. The majority of these, they've already agreed to. It's just not in the pattern book completed.
I appreciate that. I'm just not sure what the wording of the motion would need to be.
Require completed sidewalk network of 6-foot sidewalks on both sides. I think we're in agreement there. Apply ornamentation and fenestration standards for all street-facing facades, including those facing Highway 78. I think we're good there. The issue of require alternatives to internally illuminated signs on building faces, but potentially allow on monument and directional signs. We have the issue there, other than, except it was clarified that buildings over 5,000 square feet will be allowed the internally illuminated signage. Is that correct? All right. The cause was shown as you have indicated. 55-foot north-south right-of-way connecting the east-west boulevard to the remainder of the rail track. We've agreed to strike the outlaw impervious coverage due to the entire project meeting the 60% requirement. Augment green space within the parking lots to sufficiently break up the asphalt areas. And then elimination of the reduction of stucco facade to a maximum of 10 to 12%. We will include berming and screening along the boulevard to mitigate the visual impact of the large parking areas. And make the south stormwater management pond a water feature with aeration, fountain, landscape, and appoint this area as an amenity in park. And then not written but stated was approval of GDOT permits and approval processes for the traffic signal installations.
And I hate to be that's 7. I counted 7, if I'm not mistaken. So if there were a motion, it would be motion to approve rezone from B3 to PCD, subject to the proffered pattern book, subject to those 7 additional conditions that were just outlined by Mr. Probst, subject to a development agreement, and subject to the Phase 2 parcel and the outlot parcels requiring further approval from this board as a PCD.
So I would just ask members of the council, without a motion coming at this point in time, does anyone see any reason at this point why that should not be presented? I mean, we can vote on it when a motion's made, but.
But I agree, but prior to asking that, are there any other significant questions about any point, any particular point that our team made, that their team made? Moshe?
One thing that I was thinking of as we were going, are you familiar with the shops at WebGen in Snellville, Georgia? They have the big signage at each entryway to the shopping center with the big stone wall and all the landscaping. Is there any kind of signage indication for what this is called and where's that going to be? And at the Highway 11, 138, and I don't know if that's.
Yeah, we do actually show signage. It's hard to see, but we've got monument signage here on 11. And then also over here on Charlotte Rowell, those are going to be the shopping center signage. And then we actually have 2 directional signs. Okay, sorry, make sure I'm pointing correctly. One at this P4 Pad Shops building here, kind of directing patrons to what stores would be where. And a second directional sign is here in the middle between Pad 2 and Pad 3.
Do you have
And
the
we have
elevations?
a third, I'm sorry?
You have the elevations?
Oh, do we do have this? Okay, I'll leave it. And then we have a third directional signage on the west end of the parkway where we have that big green space on the left.
410, I think.
So the large sign, of course, is the one at the 2 entrances. And then as Jennifer was pointing out, there's the little directional sign. The monument sign would be internally lit. The directional sign will be ground lit, probably, with some lights.
So that entire sign's going to be internally lit.
Where the tenant signage is, that's correct, yeah.
Wait, say that again?
the large sign where the tenant signage is, that will be internally lit. Where it says tenant signage, those panels will be internally lit. And then on the left side, the decorative element will be internally lit with frosted glass also.
How many sides are on that big sign?
We'll have 5 major tenants.
No, I mean, how many sides can you read that from?
Oh, 2.
Two.
2. It's just, yeah. It's duplicate on both sides.
What's the rationale for that being internally lit as opposed to externally?
Again, with internally lit, again, it's kind of a national tenant driven, but also,
Just because they want it?
that's part of it, but also to directionally lit those signs, the directional lights would get in the way of other tenant signage. So for instance, if you did like goosenecks, for instance, or an LED horizontal light, as you're driving, that light would get in the way of another sign, correct? Because it would have to project out in order to light down there. So however you do it, whether you put a horizontal light at the very top, 2 more down, or 3 more down, that light as it projects out would get in the distraction of the sign above it. So it would block the view of it.
Just to, I know Speedy's not here tonight, another quick comment. One of the things he cautioned, as Jennifer pointed out, this stacked monument sign, excuse me, hit the wrong button. This stacked monument sign is over by the traffic signals and by the main entrances. And one thing the traffic engineer cautioned about is if you internally light it, it's a much safer situation. If you externally light it, then you've got shining light interfering with potentially the function of the traffic signal, and B, traffic moving up and down the road. They see lights that they're not used to seeing. So it also has a safety function to keep these internally lit, according to the traffic engineer.
All right, so question. So if you've got that at the entrances, why then do they need the big internally lit signs on the building? Can people just not find their building without a big internally lit sign?
I'm back to the retailers again, basically dictate to us that that's their prototypical signage.
But there are communities in which they've made those accommodations.
Potentially, I never have, and they've not offered that flexibility here. So
Amelia Island,
able to offer that.
Seaside,
Peachtree City,
Peachtree City.
Madison.
And again, I'm not trying to get hung up in the minutia, but for me, this is something that's important, right? I mean, we're trying to carry on the same characteristic of the entire town, and that is a huge chunk of what people are coming to Monroe for. And so, again, I don't want to get stuck here.
I'm not disagreeing. I understand the argument. I'm just conveying to you, the conversation's been had with the tenants, and they're insisting on their internally lit signs, and that's, I don't have anything, an alternative to offer here. I understand, we can find examples of where somebody made an exception, but generally under the bell curve, this is all they've offered in Monroe, so I don't have anything else, to offer here.
Before the COA, do you think you could produce some confidential letters that staff could see that would show the hardship from the retailers?
Well, just to
On the
add to it,
signage.
all this signage, the monument signage you see there with their sign panels, their store signage, those are all exhibits to the lease we signed with them. So when I sign that lease, I'm committed to build that sign for
Correct.
them at that location.
Understand.
They all these major retailers have signed, Rick can tell you, he deals with them. They sign departments, sign experts, sign gurus. We've gotten in trouble before. For example, they've got something called kerning. It has to do with the size and spacing between the letters of the sign, and I have failed on that point before. So they have basically sign police that make sure we do this correctly. They all have their own sign vendors and sign companies. And I mean, signage is their lifeblood, and that's the only way I know to explain this. If those of y'all running business, y'all know how important signage is. I know what you're saying, I just don't have that flexibility to offer this time. Maybe another time and place, but not this time, I just don't.
Well, in lieu of, if we were to concede there, Mr. Argo, would you be willing, if you go back to that area that you consolidated the detention ponds and made one central, and we talked about making that an amenity or a park-like setting with benches, I think, and you had agreed to that? Would you do a walking trail around that area for us?
Feasible, I don't know the grade there. I don't know if it's too steep for that. or if that-
We haven't looked at the grades. It could be feasible. We would need to look at safety factors with, having a sidewalk against 78. But we've already
You
planned for.
did it internally.
I was gonna say, we've
I
already
know-
planned for the sidewalk along the parkway, so there's already a portion of sidewalk. Maybe it wouldn't go all the way around, but maybe you could do like 3 legs up, a U shape around it. I just would caution putting a sidewalk up against 78.
Well, I know we have a county building on Highway 81, which is extremely busy. And they were able to accomplish a wonderful walking trail. It's not lit, so it's only used during daylight hours, but it is utilized tremendously in that area. So, I'd love to see that as a possibility.
Added to a motion.
We can utilize that in the amenity park plan. That will be incorporated in the development agreement.
And we can also study that further when we get into design. We haven't gotten to final design. We can go through and discuss that with staff too.
Okay.
Okay, do I have any more questions? Any comments? Like a motion?
I would make the motion, and beyond me to have anything written out, wording for the motion, but I would like the motion to be that we approve the zoning request with the conditions stated by Mr. Probst earlier, and the subsequent things that Mr. Rosenthal mentioned earlier. If someone can put all that into a motion format, I would appreciate it.
So striking the stucco, allowing interior signage for buildings over 5,000 square feet.
6-foot sidewalks on one side.
Sidewalks on both sides, completed.
Both sides,
sidewalk
it
network.
will work.
On the parkway.
Okay, on the parkway.
55-foot, north-south right-of-way connecting the east-west boulevard to the remainder of the Rowell track.
And that sidewalk would only be on one side.
That will be on one side, and it will be landscaped, including trees. Augment the green space within the parking lots to sufficiently break up the asphalt areas. And we've already mentioned the stucco issue. Include berming and screening along the boulevard to mitigate the visual impact of the large parking areas, and make the south stormwater management pond a feature with aeration fountain and landscape, and appoint this area as an amenity and park with studying the walking trail issue around the pond.
Should just say to include.
To include
If
that.
the topo and,
If staff and applicant determines feasible.
Is that good, Mr. Bradley?
There was a 7th item, which was the DOT approval of the, signalized intersections. And then our legal input was subject to a development agreement and subject to the outlots in Phase 2 requiring further approval by this board as a PCD.
And the project book.
Right.
And subject to the originally submitted pattern book, I believe dated May the 6th. That's correct.
So you're amending your motion to include all of this?
To include all those things.
I will second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your coming out tonight. The sausage has been made. Need a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Mr. Ross Bradley, Ms. Malcolm. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Good night, everybody.